The town of Coldwater Springs lay baking under the merciless August sun, its single dusty street stretching between weathered storefronts like a scar across the desert's face. Red dust swirled in lazy devils whenever the hot wind gusted down from the mountains, coating everything: buildings, horses, people, in a fine layer of grit that turned the whole world the color of dried blood. Beyond the ramshackle collection of saloons, general stores, and boarding houses, the land stretched endlessly, scorched grasslands rolling toward purple mountains that shimmered like mirages in the heat. Martha Coleman pressed her face against the cracked window of their cabin, watching dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight that pierced through. At 19, she should have been married by now, maybe with a child on her hip and another on the way. Instead, she found herself trapped in this dying town with a father whose love for whiskey had long ago drowned whatever love he'd once held for his family. "Martha!" Samuel Coleman's voice cracked like a whip from the other room. "Get yourself ready. We're going to town." She knew better than to ask why. These days, her father only ventured into town for two reasons: to buy more liquor or to beg for extensions on his mounting debts. The drought had killed their few cattle. The mining claim had yielded nothing but fool's gold, and what little money they'd saved had vanished into bottles of rot-gut whiskey. Martha smoothed her faded calico dress, one of only two she owned, and twisted her dark hair into a simple bun. In the cracked mirror propped against the wall, she saw a face that had once been called pretty by the local boys. Now, worry lines creased her forehead, and her brown eyes held a weariness that belonged to someone twice her age. The walk to town took 20 minutes under the blazing sun. Samuel Coleman stumbled twice, though whether from drink or exhaustion, Martha couldn't tell. His clothes hung loose on his gaunt frame, and his eyes darted nervously as they approached the main street. "Pa," Martha ventured, "what business do we have in town?" He didn't answer, just grabbed her arm tighter and steered her toward the stockyard at the edge of town. Martha's stomach clenched. The monthly livestock auction was today. She could hear the bawling of cattle and the auctioneer's rapid-fire chant carrying on the wind. The stockyard was crowded with ranchers, traders, and townspeople. The smell of manure and sweat hung thick in the air. Penned cattle milled nervously, their eyes rolling white as cowboys on horseback kept them contained. Martha recognized many faces: Mrs. Henderson from the general store, the Paulson brothers who ran the largest ranch in the county, old Doc Winters leaning on his cane. "Stay close," Samuel muttered, pulling her through the crowd toward a group of men standing near the auction platform. Martha didn't recognize them, city men by their clothes, with hard faces and calculating eyes. "Coleman," one of them said, a thin man with pockmarked skin and yellowed teeth. "Thought you might not show." "I'm here, Mr. Garrison," Samuel replied, his voice shaking. "Just like I promised." Garrison's eyes slid to Martha, appraising her like she was one of the cattle in the pen. "This her?" Martha's blood turned to ice water in her veins. "Pa, what's happening?" Samuel wouldn't meet her eyes. "Martha, these men, they've bought up my debts. All of them. The house, the land, everything. I don't understand." But even as she said it, a terrible understanding was dawning. "Your father owes us near $800, Garrison said, still studying her. "More than that worthless patch of dirt he calls a ranch is worth. But we worked out an arrangement." "No," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Pa, no, you can't. It's done." Samuel's voice cracked with desperation and shame. "They'll take you back east. You'll work in one of their establishments. Work off the debt. It's the only way. Martha, the only way to save what's left." The world seemed to tilt. Martha heard the words but couldn't process them. Around her, the livestock auction continued, the auctioneer's voice rising and falling in its familiar rhythm. Cattle were being sold, their prices called out for all to hear, and she was being sold too, just like them, like livestock. "You can't do this," she breathed, backing away. But Garrison's men moved to flank her, cutting off escape. "Contract's legal," Garrison said, producing a paper from his coat. "Signed and witnessed. You belong to us now, girl." The crowd had begun to notice the commotion. Some looked away quickly, unwilling to involve themselves. Others watched with a mixture of pity and disgust, whether for her or her father. Martha couldn't tell. She saw Mrs. Henderson press a handkerchief to her mouth, saw the Paulson brothers exchange dark looks. "Someone help me!" Martha cried out, but her voice was lost in the noise of the auction. Those who heard pretended they hadn't. One of Garrison's men produced a length of rope. "Come quietly, girl. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They bound her wrists in front of her, the rope rough against her skin. The humiliation burned worse than the desert sun. She was being trussed up like one of the cattle, made ready for transport. Tears began to fall, hot and bitter on her cheeks. "That's prime stock you're getting," Samuel said, his voice hollow. "She can cook, clean, knows her letters." "Shut up, Coleman," Garrison snapped. "We know what we bought." They began to lead her away, one man on each side. Martha's legs felt like water, barely supporting her weight. She turned back once to see her father standing there, shoulders slumped, looking older than his years. He met her eyes for just a moment before looking away, unable to bear the accusation he found there. The townspeople parted to let them through, their faces a blur of shame and indifference. Martha heard whispers following in their wake. Coleman's girl. Sold her like a prize heifer. What kind of man? Nothing to be done about it. Contracts are contracts. They led her past the general store where she'd bought penny candy as a child, past the church where her mother lay buried, past the schoolhouse where she'd learned to read and write and dream of better things. All of it looked different now, foreign and hostile, as if the town itself had betrayed her. At the edge of the stockyard, a wagon waited, its bed fitted with iron rings for shackles. Other young women sat inside, their faces blank with shock or resignation. Martha's legs gave out then, and she would have fallen if the men hadn't hauled her up bodily and deposited her in the wagon bed. "Please," she whispered one more time, though she didn't know who she was begging. The men, God, the indifferent sky. They shackled her ankles to the wagon bed, the iron cold despite the heat. Around her, the sounds of the auction continued. The slam of the auctioneer's gavel, the lowing of cattle, the shouts of cowboys. She was just another piece of merchandise, sold and shipped. As the wagon lurched into motion, Martha let her tears fall freely. Sold like livestock. That's what she was now. The dust of Coldwater Springs rose behind them in a red cloud, obscuring the town, her father, her entire life. She wept for what was lost, for what was to come, for the girl she'd been that morning who'd thought the worst thing in her life was her father's drinking. The sun beat down mercilessly as they rolled out onto the open plain, heading east toward a fate she couldn't bear to imagine. Martha closed her eyes and let the tears come, each one a small rebellion against the men who'd bought her, the father who'd sold her, and the world that allowed such things to happen. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains. But no rain would come. It never did anymore. The drought had taken everything. The cattle, the crops, and now her, Martha Coleman, sold like livestock at the Thursday auction, another casualty of hard times and harder men. The wagon rolled east for 2 days through landscapes that grew increasingly desolate. They passed through dried creek beds where water had once flowed, past abandoned homesteads with their windows staring blindly at the endless sky. The other women in the wagon, Sarah from Nebraska, Annie from Kansas, a Mexican girl who spoke no English, had stopped crying by the second day. Now they sat in silence, swaying with the wagon's motion, their faces masks of resignation. Martha's wrists were raw from the rope, her throat parched despite the meager water rations Garrison's men provided. The guards, 3 of them, rotating shifts, paid the women little attention beyond ensuring they didn't attempt escape. Where would they run anyway? The land stretched empty in every direction, offering no shelter, no hope. On the afternoon of the second day, the sky began to change. What had been endless blue grew dark along the northern horizon, clouds piling up like black mountains. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and something else. Danger. Storm coming, one of the guards muttered, spurring his horse closer to the wagon. We need to find shelter. Garrison, riding at the head of their small caravan, stood in his stirrups to survey the land. There's nothing for miles. We push through. But the storm had other plans. Within an hour, the wind had grown to a howl, driving dust and debris before it. The horses grew skittish, tossing their heads and fighting their bits. Lightning forked across the darkened sky, followed by thunder that shook the ground. Then Martha heard it. Hoofbeats, fast and hard, coming from the south. Through the swirling dust, she could make out riders approaching, perhaps a dozen of them, moving with purpose. "Riders!" one of the guards shouted, reaching for his rifle. The riders came on like phantoms through the dust storm, their shapes indistinct until they were almost upon the wagon. At their head rode a man who seemed part of the storm itself, his long duster coat whipping behind him, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. "Stand and deliver!" The lead rider's voice carried over the storm, rough as gravel but clear. "This is a robbery. Gentlemen, nobody needs to die today." Garrison cursed and reached for his pistol, but the lead rider was faster. A shot cracked through the air, and Garrison's gun went spinning from his hand. He clutched his wrist, cursing. "Next one goes through your heart," the rider said calmly. "Tell your men to drop their weapons." Martha pressed herself against the wagon's side, heart hammering. Were these men any better than Garrison's crew, or had they simply traded one set of captors for another? The guards, outnumbered and outgunned, slowly laid down their rifles. The riders closed in, their faces hidden by bandanas against the dust, all except their leader, who nudged his horse closer to the wagon. That's when Martha saw his face clearly for the first time. It was a hard face, all angles and weathered planes, with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as the storm clouds above, sharp as broken glass. This was a man who had seen violence, who had perhaps dealt more than his share of it. "Well, well," he said, his gaze taking in the wagon's occupants. "What have we here? Cattle? Goods for market?" His voice grew harder. "Or something else?" "None of your business, blood rider." Garrison spat from where he knelt in the dust. "You have no authority here, blood rider." Martha had heard the name whispered in saloons and general stores. A former cavalry soldier turned outlaw. They said, a man who'd killed for both North and South during the war, who'd turned his back on civilization and lived by his own brutal code. The blood rider dismounted in one smooth motion, his spurs ringing as his boots hit the ground. He walked to the wagon, ignoring the guns his men kept trained on Garrison's crew. Up close, Martha could see the fine lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 35 or 40. "No authority?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "Out here, this," he patted the colt at his hip, "is all the authority I need." His gaze swept over the women in the wagon, taking in their bound wrists, their shackled ankles. His jaw tightened. "Where are you taking them?" "They're indentured servants," Garrison said quickly. "Legal contracts. We're taking them to fulfill their obligations." The blood rider's eyes found Martha's. She met his gaze, trying not to show her fear. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, though not of faces. Recognition of something deeper. "Show me these contracts," he said quietly. "I don't have to show you anything." The blood rider moved faster than Martha could follow. One moment he was standing by the wagon. The next, Garrison was on his back in the dust with the outlaw's boot on his throat. "The contracts," he repeated in that same quiet tone. One of the guards, hands shaking, produced a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. The blood rider took it, still keeping Garrison pinned, and flipped through the papers. His expression grew darker with each page. "Indenture contracts," he said finally, "for debts ranging from $100 to $1,000. Tell me, Garrison, that's your name, isn't it? What kind of work were these women going to do to pay off such debts?" Garrison's face had turned purple, but he managed to wheeze out, "Service work. Domestic service. Liar." The Blood Rider increased the pressure slightly. "I know what kind of establishments you run in Denver and Kansas City. These women weren't bound for domestic service." He removed his boot from Garrison's throat and turned back to the wagon. "Cut them loose," he ordered his men. "You can't do this," Garrison gasped, struggling to his knees. "Those contracts are legal. You're stealing property." The Blood Rider rounded on him so fast that Garrison flinched back. "Property?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Is that what you call them?" One of the Blood Rider's men, a young Mexican with quick hands, was already at the wagon, cutting the ropes that bound the women's wrists. When he reached Martha, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Gracias," she whispered. "De nada, señorita." He replied with a kind smile. The Blood Rider watched as his men freed the women, his expression unreadable. Thunder crashed overhead, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. "Here's what's going to happen," he said to Garrison. "You and your men are going to get on your horses and ride west, back the way you came. If I see you east of here again, if I hear you're still in this business, I'll find you. And next time, I won't be so charitable." "You're making a mistake," Garrison snarled. "I have powerful friends. They'll hunt you down like the dog you are." The Blood Rider smiled then, and it was a terrible thing to see. "They're welcome to try. Wouldn't be the first time." He drew his Colt, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it casually at his side. "Now ride, before I change my mind about letting you live." Garrison and his men scrambled for their horses. As they mounted, Garrison turned back. "This isn't over. Blood Rider, those women are legally—" The Colt roared, and Garrison's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. "That's your only warning," the Blood Rider said. "Ride." They rode, spurring their horses hard despite the worsening storm. Soon they were lost to sight in the rain and dust. The Blood Rider holstered his weapon and turned back to the wagon. The women huddled together, free but uncertain, the rain beginning to soak through their thin dresses. "Can any of you ride?" he asked. A couple of hands went up tentatively. "Good. Jake, Marcus, give them your horses. You'll ride double with the others." He looked at Martha, who had climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs. "What's your name?" "Martha," she managed. "Martha Coleman." He nodded once. Well, folks call me lots of things, none of them polite." He glanced at the storm clouds gathering overhead. "We need to find shelter. There's an abandoned way station about 5 miles north. Can you make it?" Martha looked at the other women, scared, soaked, but free. Then she looked back at this strange, dangerous man who had appeared like something out of a fever dream to save them. "No one should be sold like a livestock," he said quietly, echoing her own thoughts. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "We can make it." For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered in those storm-gray eyes. "Then let's ride. This tempest is just getting started." As Martha accepted a hand up onto one of the horses, she wondered if he meant the storm overhead or something else entirely. Either way, she was free of the wagon, free of Garrison, free of the fate that had awaited her in the east. She was riding into the unknown with a man called Blood Rider, killer and savior both. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in days, she felt something like hope. The abandoned way station materialized through the rain like a ghost of better times. Its roof sagged and half the windows were broken, but it offered shelter from the storm that had grown into a proper tempest. The Blood Rider's men worked efficiently, seeing to the horses while the women were ushered inside. Martha stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the Blood Rider direct his men with quiet commands and subtle gestures. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years living rough, every action purposeful. When he finally entered the station, water streaming from his duster, his eyes found hers briefly before surveying the room. "Jake, get a fire going," he ordered. Marcus, check the back rooms for anything useful. Ladies, please make yourselves as comfortable as you can. The other women, Sarah, Annie, and the Mexican girl they'd learned was named Rosa, huddled near where Jake was coaxing life into the old fireplace. Martha found herself standing apart, unsure where she belonged in this strange new dynamic. Here, the blood rider held out a blanket, produced from one of the saddlebags. You're shivering. She hadn't realized she was. Martha accepted the blanket, their fingers brushing briefly. His hands were calloused, scarred, but gentle in that fleeting contact. Thank you, she said. Then, because she had to know, why did you help us? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the broken window at the storm. Maybe because I've seen too many people treated like property. Maybe because I needed to do something decent for once. He glanced at her. Or maybe I just don't like men like Garrison. They say you're a killer, Martha said, surprising herself with her boldness. They say a lot of things. His smile was tired. Some of them are even true. Jake got the fire crackling, and warmth began to seep into the room. The Blood Rider's men, she counted 8 of them, were a mixed bunch. Mexican vaqueros, former soldiers, men with haunted eyes and quick hands. They treated the women with careful respect, maintaining distance while ensuring they had food and water, as the storm raged outside. The Blood Rider produced hardtack and jerky from their supplies, along with a pot for coffee. It wasn't much, but after 2 days of near starvation, it tasted like a feast to Martha. Where will you take us? Sarah asked quietly. She was a thin woman with mouse-brown hair, older than Martha by perhaps 5 years. The Blood Rider considered the question. Where do you need to go? I have nowhere, Sarah admitted. My husband died of fever. His debts became mine. Annie nodded. Same. Lost my farm to the bank. Then the bank sold me to Garrison to recoup their losses. Rosa spoke in rapid Spanish, and one of the vaqueros translated. She says her father sold her to pay for medicine for her brothers. She has no home to return to. Martha thought of Coldwater Springs, of her father's betrayal. Neither do I. The Blood Rider stood by the fire, the flames casting shadows across his scarred face. There's a settlement about 3 days north, Fountain Creek. It's different from most towns. People there don't ask too many questions about where you come from, only about what you're willing to work for. You could make a fresh start. What about you? Martha asked. Won't Garrison come after you? Several of the men chuckled at that. The Blood Rider's smile was sharp. Let him try. I've been hunted by better men than him. The night wore on. The other women dozed by the fire, exhausted by their ordeal. The Blood Rider's men took turns on watch, disappearing and reappearing from the storm like ghosts. Martha found herself unable to sleep, too aware of every sound, every movement. She noticed the Blood Rider hadn't slept either. He sat by the window, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements, his eyes never leaving the storm outside. You should rest, he said without looking at her. So should you. Old habits. He set the gun aside. In the war, you learn to survive on little sleep. After the war, he shrugged. Some habits you can't break. Which side? Martha asked, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. Both. Neither. His laugh was bitter. I started with the Union, cavalry scout. Then my unit massacred a Confederate field hospital. Women and wounded men, cut down like wheat. When I protested, my captain had me flogged for insubordination. Martha said nothing, sensing he needed to speak more than she needed to respond. So I deserted. Joined up with the Confederates. Figured they couldn't be worse. I was wrong. Different uniform. Same brutality. By the end, I was fighting for whoever wasn't trying to kill me that particular day. He looked at his hands. They call me Blood Rider because I've spilled blood wearing blue and gray both, made enemies on both sides. When the war ended, there was no home for men like me to go back to, so you became an outlaw. I became what I had to become to survive. He met her eyes then. Just like you would have. If Garrison had gotten you to Kansas City, we all do what we must to keep breathing. Martha pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I would have died first. No, he said quietly. You wouldn't have. You're stronger than that. I can see it in your eyes. You would have survived and hated yourself for it. But you would have survived. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She wanted to deny it, but couldn't. Is that what you do? She asked. Survive and hate yourself for it? Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability quickly hidden. Every damn day. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the station's remaining windows. In the brief illumination of lightning, Martha saw his face clearly, not the hardened killer of legend, but a man carrying wounds that went deeper than scars. You saved us, she said. That has to count for something. One good deed against a lifetime of bad ones? He shook his head. That's not how the ledger works. Maybe it's not about ledgers, Martha said. Maybe it's about choosing to be better, one decision at a time. He studied her for a long moment. You talk like someone who hasn't seen what people are capable of. I've seen enough, Martha replied, thinking of her father's face as he sold her. I've seen what people do when they're desperate, when they're broken. But I've also seen, she gestured to the room, to his men keeping watch, to the rescued women sleeping by the fire. This, you could have ridden past. You didn't. Don't make me into something I'm not, he warned. I'm no hero, Miss Coleman. I didn't say you were, but you're not the monster they make you out to be either. The wind howled through the broken windows, bringing the smell of rain and sage. Somewhere in the back rooms, one of the men was singing softly in Spanish, a mournful melody that spoke of home and loss. You should try to sleep. The blood rider said again, We ride at first light, storm or no storm. This time, Martha obeyed, settling near the other women, but she kept watching him from beneath lowered lashes. This contradiction of a man who spoke of ledgers and blood while showing more kindness than she'd known in months. As she finally drifted towards sleep, she heard him speaking quietly to one of his men. Double the watch. Garrison won't give up easy. And make sure the women have the best horses come morning. They've been through enough. The storm began to ease as dawn approached, the thunder growing distant. Martha woke to find the blood rider's duster draped over her like an extra blanket, still warm from his body. The man himself stood by the door, silhouetted against the lightening sky, keeping watch over them all. She closed her eyes again, not quite ready to face whatever came next, but for the first time since her father had dragged her to that stockyard, she didn't feel alone. She was riding into the unknown with a band of outlaws and fallen women, led by a man haunted by his past. It should have felt like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Instead, it felt like the first step towards something new, dangerous, uncertain, but honest in a way her old life had never been. Don't let them break you, he'd said by the fire. Martha Coleman, sold like livestock but not broken, pulled the duster closer and made a silent promise. She wouldn't let anyone break her. Not Garrison, not the world, not even her own fears. She would survive. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to live. The mining town of Silver Ridge sprawled across the mountainside like a festering wound, all rough timber buildings and muddy streets that reeked of whiskey and desperation. They arrived as the sun touched the peaks, painting the ramshackle structures in deceptive gold. The blood rider had wanted to skirt the town entirely, but they needed supplies, and the women needed proper clothes before attempting the mountain passes. Keep your heads down, he instructed quietly as they rode down the main street. We get what we need and leave. But in a town like Silver Ridge, a group of riders escorting 4 women was bound to draw attention. Miners stopped their work to stare. Saloon girls peered from behind curtained windows. And from every shadowed doorway, eyes tracked their progress with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The general store sat halfway down the street, its false front proclaiming Henderson's Dry Goods and Supplies in fading paint. The blood rider dismounted, gesturing for 2 of his men to accompany him inside. Jake, watch the women. Marcus, Santos, take positions at either end of the street. Martha felt the weight of the town's gaze like a physical thing. Beside her, Sarah shifted nervously in her saddle. "They're all staring," she whispered. "Let them stare," Annie said with false bravado, though her hands trembled on the reins. A group of miners had gathered outside the saloon across the street, passing a bottle between them. One, a thick-set man with a week's worth of beard, called out, "Hey there, ladies. You looking for work? Big Jim's always hiring." Laughter rippled through the group. Jake's hand moved to his sidearm, but he didn't draw. "They're not interested," he said evenly. "Wasn't talking to you, boy." The miner sneered. He took a step forward, emboldened by whiskey and his companions. "I'm talking to them pretty ladies, especially that dark-haired one. What do you say, sweetheart? Big Jim treats his girls real nice." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks. Anger, not embarrassment. Before she could respond, the saloon doors swung open and the blood rider emerged from the store, arms full of supplies. He took in the scene with a glance. "Problem here?" His voice carried despite its quiet tone. The miner's confidence faltered slightly. Even drunk, he recognized danger when it stood before him. "No problem. Just being friendly to the ladies. They're not interested in your friendship." The blood rider handed the supplies up to one of his men, his movements unhurried. "Or your employer's offer. You don't speak for them." The miner pressed, though he took a step back. "Maybe they want to hear what Big Jim has to offer. Good money for pretty girls in a mining town." The blood rider smiled then, and Martha saw several of the miners flinch. "You're right. I don't speak for them." He looked up at Martha. "Miss Coleman, this man seems to think you might be interested in employment at his establishment. Would you like to hear his offer?" Martha met his eyes, understanding what he was doing. He was giving her the power to respond, to stand up for herself. She straightened in her saddle. "I've recently escaped men who thought they could buy and sell me like property," she said, her voice carrying clear across the street. "I have no interest in entering another form of bondage, no matter how it's dressed up. So no, sir, I don't want to hear your offer. Not now, not ever." The miner's face flushed red. His companions muttered among themselves, some looking ashamed, others angry at being dismissed by a woman. "High and mighty for someone riding with the blood rider," the miner spat. "Everyone knows what kind of man he is. Killer, traitor. You're no better than—" The sound of the blood rider's colt-clearing leather cut him off mid-sentence. He hadn't pointed it at anyone, just held it loose at his side, but the threat was clear. "Finish that sentence," he said softly. "Please, give me a reason." The street had gone silent. Even the piano music from the saloon had stopped. Martha could hear her own heartbeat, loud as thunder. "Jerome, come on." One of the other miners tugged at the first man's sleeve. "It ain't worth it. Let's go back inside." Jerome, the name suited his piggish features, looked like he wanted to press the issue, but self-preservation won out over wounded pride. He spat in the dirt, narrowly missing the blood rider's boots, then turned and stumped back into the saloon. His companions followed, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. The blood rider holstered his weapon and swung back into his saddle with easy grace. "We're leaving." They rode out of Silver Ridge in tense silence, the town's eyes following them until they were swallowed by the pine forests beyond. Only when they were well clear did Martha release the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said to the blood rider, who had fallen in beside her. "For what?" "For letting me speak for myself." He glanced at her, something like approval in those storm-gray eyes. "You didn't need my permission, but men like that, sometimes they need to see iron before they'll listen to reason. Would you have shot him? If he'd finished that sentence about you, yes." The matter-of-fact way he said it should have frightened her. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. After a lifetime of men who spoke sweet words while harboring cruel intentions, his brutal honesty was refreshing. They climbed higher into the mountains as the day wore on. The pine forests gave way to aspen groves, their leaves shimmering gold in the afternoon light. The air grew thin and cold, and Martha was grateful for the thick wool dress the blood rider had purchased in Silver Ridge, along with a proper coat and sturdy boots. Camp that night was in a sheltered grove beside a mountain stream. The men were extra vigilant, posting double watches and keeping the fire low. The confrontation in Silver Ridge had put everyone on edge. Martha found herself sitting beside the Blood Rider again as darkness fell. It was becoming a pattern. The other women sought comfort in each other's company. But Martha was drawn to this complicated man who wore violence like a second skin, yet showed unexpected moments of gentleness. "That miner, Jerome, he wasn't wrong," the Blood Rider said suddenly. "About what I am. A killer? Among other things." Martha considered this. "How many men have you killed? I stopped counting after the war." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Does that frighten you? Should it? A sensible woman would say yes. A sensible woman wouldn't be sitting here talking to you." Martha pulled her new coat closer. "A sensible woman would have married young, had babies, lived a quiet life, and never known what it felt like to be sold like cattle. I think I'm done with being sensible." He laughed at that, a real laugh that transformed his face. For a moment, she could see the man he might have been in a different life. Younger, unburdened, capable of joy. "Tell me about Fountain Creek," she said. "This town where people don't ask questions. It's not much to look at. Started as a trading post, grew into a haven for people who needed a second chance, or a third, or a 10th. He smiled wryly. "The mayor is a former Confederate spy. The sheriff used to rob banks. The schoolmarm allegedly poisoned her first husband, though she maintains his death was natural." "And they just live there, together? There's a code you don't ask about before. You judge people by what they do now, not what they did then. It's not perfect. Nowhere is. But it's better than most places for people like us." "People like us," Martha repeated. "Outlaws and fallen women. Survivors," he corrected. "That's all any of us are, when you strip away the fancy labels." Rosa approached them then, shy but determined. In halting English mixed with Spanish, she asked, "Señor, in this town, I could work, real work." "Si, señorita, the hotel needs maids. The restaurant needs cooks. The seamstress needs assistants. Honest work for honest pay." Tears glittered in Rosa's eyes. She clutched his hand briefly, a gesture that clearly surprised him, then retreated to the other women to share the news. "You're giving them hope," Martha observed. "False hope is crueler than no hope." "Is it false?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I've never been much good at hope myself, but maybe—" He looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. Maybe some people deserve a chance at it. Later, when the camp had settled for the night, Martha lay wrapped in her blankets, staring up at the stars through the pine branches. She could hear the stream gurgling nearby, the soft nickering of horses, the quiet voices of the men on watch. She thought about that moment in Silver Ridge when he'd asked her to speak for herself. Such a small thing. Yet it had meant everything. For the first time in her life, a man had treated her as an equal, capable of making her own choices and fighting her own battles. The Blood Rider was right. He was a killer. She'd seen the truth of it in the way he moved, the way other men feared him, the casual readiness for violence that never quite left his bearing. But he was also the man who'd cut her bonds, who'd draped his coat over her while she slept, who spoke of ledgers and redemption with the weight of someone who'd given up on both for himself, but not for others. "Don't let them break you," he'd said that first night. Martha touched the place on her wrists where the rope burns were finally healing. She wasn't broken. Bent, perhaps, scarred. Certainly, but not broken. And tomorrow, they would reach Fountain Creek, a town of second chances, where a woman sold like livestock might become something else entirely. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The mountain path narrowed as they climbed higher, forcing them to ride single file along a ledge that dropped away into mist-shrouded valleys. Martha kept her eyes fixed on the Blood Rider's back ahead of her, trusting her horse to follow his lead. The morning had dawned cold and clear, but clouds were building to the west, promising snow before day's end. "How much further?" Sarah called from behind, her voice tight with fear. She'd never been comfortable with heights. 2 hours, maybe 3. Jake answered, "We'll beat the storm." But the mountains had other plans. They were navigating a particularly treacherous stretch when the attack came. The first shot echoed off the canyon walls, making it impossible to tell where it originated. Martha's horse reared, nearly sending her over the edge. "Ambush!" someone shouted. More shots followed, spurts of rock dust showing where bullets struck the cliff face. The blood rider was already moving, wheeling his horse around. "Into the trees! Now!" They spurred their horses toward a stand of pine 50 yards ahead, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Martha bent low over her horse's neck, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beside her, Rosa was praying in rapid Spanish. They made the tree line, but not unscathed. Santos clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. One of the pack horses was down, their supplies scattered across the trail. "Circle up!" the blood rider commanded. His men responded with practiced efficiency, forming a defensive position among the trees. "Jake, see to Santos. Marcus, count ammunition." "Who are they?" Annie asked, her face pale but determined. The answer came in the form of Jerome's voice, carrying across the open ground. "Blood rider, send out the women and you can go free. This ain't about you." Martha felt ice in her veins. The miner from Silver Ridge had followed them. Garrison's offering good money for their return. Jerome continued, "No need for anyone else to die. Just send them out nice and peaceful." The blood rider's expression was carved from stone. He looked at Martha and the other women. "Your choice. You want to go with them?" "Never," Martha said immediately. The others echoed her refusal. He nodded once, then called back. "You hear that? Jerome? They're not interested. Now turn around before this gets uglier than it needs to be. 12 of us, 8 of you, and 1 already wounded." Jerome replied, "Plus we got the high ground. Be smart for once in your life. Blood rider." Martha could see them now, spread among the rocks above, miners and hired guns. The dregs of Silver Ridge come to collect Garrison's bounty. The blood riders studied their positions with a tactical eye. "Annie," he said quietly, "you said you could shoot." "My husband taught me. I'm no sharpshooter, but I can hit what I aim at." He handed her his rifle. "See that man in the red shirt, 3rd from the left? When I give the word, put a bullet near him. Don't try to hit him, just make him duck." She nodded, checking the rifle with competent hands. Martha felt a surge of admiration for the woman's courage. "The rest of you, stay low," the blood rider instructed. "This is about to get loud." He looked at his men. "Remember, they're miners, not soldiers. They'll break when pressed." "Jake, you and Luis flank left. Marcus, Santos, if you can shoot, take the right, rest of you, with me." "What's the plan?" Martha asked. His smile was all teeth. "We're going to teach them why it's a bad idea to corner a blood rider." What followed was a lesson in controlled violence. The blood rider had read his opponents correctly. They were tough men, but unused to organized resistance. When Annie's shot sent the red-shirted man diving for cover, it created a gap in their line. Jake and Luis exploited it immediately, their covering fire sending 2 more miners scrambling. The blood rider himself moved like a force of nature. Martha watched him advance from tree to tree, never exposing himself for more than a heartbeat, his pistols speaking with deadly precision. One miner tried to rush their position and went down clutching his leg. Another broke cover to get a better angle and paid for it with a bullet through his shoulder. "They're flanking us!" someone above shouted in panic. The organized ambush was dissolving into chaos. Martha heard horses. Some of the miners were already fleeing. Jerome's voice rose above the gunfire, trying to rally his men, but the tide had turned. Then Annie cried out. Martha turned to see her clutching her arm, blood welling between her fingers. A lucky shot from above had found its mark. "I'm okay," Annie gasped, though her face was white with pain. "Just a graze," but Martha had had enough of cowering while others fought for her. She grabbed the rifle Annie had dropped and stood, sighting on a miner who was drawing a bead on the blood rider. "Martha, no!" Sarah cried, but Martha had already squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the miner spun away, his shot going wild. She worked the lever, chambering another round, a strange calm settling over her. This was different from being helpless. This was choosing to fight. Another miner broke from cover, running for his horse. Martha led him perfectly, her shot kicking up dust at his heels and sending him sprawling. She wasn't trying to kill, just to discourage, to add to their panic. "Fall back!" Jerome's voice cracked with desperation. "Fall back! Damn you!" The remaining attackers fled, some on foot, others on horseback, leaving their wounded behind. In minutes, the mountainside was quiet except for the moaning of injured men and the harsh breathing of the defenders. The blood rider materialized beside Martha, gently taking the rifle from her shaking hands. "You did good," he said simply. I shot at them." The reality of what she'd done was setting in. "You protected us. There's no shame in that." His hand briefly touched her shoulder, grounding her. "See to Annie? I'll deal with the wounded." They had 3 miners who couldn't flee, 2 with leg wounds, 1 with a shoulder injury. The blood rider's men disarmed them and provided basic medical care. Martha was surprised by the lack of vindictiveness. These men had tried to kill them, yet they were being treated with rough compassion. "Why help them?" she asked the blood rider as he bound one miner's leg. "Because the fight's over," he replied. "They're no threat now. Killing beaten men, that's not justice. It's murder." One of the wounded miners, barely more than a boy, looked up at him with frightened eyes. "You going to kill us?" "No, but you're going to take a message back to Silver Ridge." The blood rider's voice was hard. "Tell Garrison his bounty isn't worth dying for. Tell him the women are under my protection now. Anyone else who comes after them will find the same welcome you did. Understood?" The boy nodded frantically. They left the wounded with water and basic supplies, enough to survive until help arrived from Silver Ridge. As they prepared to continue their journey, Santos insisted he could ride despite his shoulder wound, and Annie's arm was cleanly bandaged. But their troubles weren't over. The storm that had been building all morning finally broke, sending snow swirling down in thick curtains. The temperature plummeted, and the trail became treacherous with ice. They pressed on, knowing they had to reach shelter before nightfall or risk freezing. Martha rode close behind the blood rider, trusting his knowledge of these mountains. Her hands were numb on the reins, her face stinging from the wind-driven snow. Just when she thought they couldn't go any further, she saw lights ahead, the warm glow of windows promising heat and safety. Fountain Creek materialized from the storm like something out of a fairy tale, its buildings huddled against the mountainside, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys. "We made it," Sarah breathed, tears freezing on her cheeks. The blood rider led them down the main street to a large building with a sign reading Sunset Hotel. The proprietor, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, took one look at their group and began issuing orders. "Get them inside before they freeze. Mary, stoke the fires. Tom, see to their horses. Lord have mercy. Is that Santos bleeding?" The woman, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley, she introduced herself, swept them into warmth and light. Soon they were seated before a roaring fire, hot coffee and soup appearing as if by magic. Martha's fingers tingled painfully as feeling returned. "Picked up more strays. Did you?" Mrs. Hartley said to the blood rider, though her tone was fond rather than scolding. "Something like that," he replied. Mrs. Hartley studied the women with shrewd eyes. "Running from something or toward something?" "Both," Martha answered honestly. "Good answer. That's what brings most folks to Fountain Creek." She turned businesslike. "I've got rooms available and work for those willing. We'll sort out the details once you've thawed out and had a proper meal." As the warmth seeped into her bones and the soup filled her empty stomach, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Safety. Outside, the storm raged against the windows, but inside was light and warmth. and the quiet chatter of people who'd chosen to see her as a person, not property. She caught the Blood Rider's eye across the room. He was speaking quietly with Mrs. Hartley, probably arranging for their stay. When he noticed her watching, something passed between them. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. They'd fought for their freedom today. Literally. Martha had discovered she was capable of violence when cornered, of standing her ground when it mattered. It was a revelation both terrible and liberating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Garrison wouldn't give up easily, and building a new life in a strange town wouldn't be simple. But tonight, she was warm and safe and free. For now. That was enough. The crack of gunfire shattered the peaceful morning in Fountain Creek. Martha dropped the bucket she'd been carrying, water splashing across the boarding house steps as she ran toward the sound. 3 weeks of quiet had made her forget that peace was always temporary in the frontier. She found chaos in the main street. Garrison had finally come, bringing with him a dozen hired guns. They'd struck at dawn, when the town was just waking. Now gun smoke hung thick in the air as townspeople scrambled for cover. The Blood Rider was already in the thick of it. Having emerged from the saloon where he'd been playing cards all night, Martha watched him dive behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood above his head. His men were scattered. Jake pinned down near the blacksmiths. Marcus and Luis taking cover behind overturned wagons. "Martha!" Sarah grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back. "Get inside." But Martha's eyes had found Santos, wounded again and trying to crawl to safety while Garrison's men advanced on his position. Without thinking, she broke free from Sarah's grip and ran. "Cover me!" she heard the Blood Rider shout. And suddenly the air was full of return fire as his men realized what she was doing. Martha reached Santos just as a bullet tugged at her skirt. She grabbed him under the arms, adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Together they scrambled behind a feed store's loading dock. "Señorita, you're loca," Santos gasped, clutching his side where fresh blood seeped through his shirt. "Maybe," Martha agreed, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wound. Her hands were steady despite the bullets whining overhead. 3 weeks of helping Mrs. Hartley with the boarding house's injured guests had taught her basic medical care. The battle raged on. Fountain Creek might be a town of second chances, but its residents knew how to fight. The former bank robber sheriff appeared with a shotgun, flanked by deputies who'd once ridden on the wrong side of the law. The schoolmarm, alleged poisoner, emerged from her house with a rifle, picking off Garrison's men with surprising accuracy. But Garrison had come prepared. His men were better armed, better positioned. They were slowly tightening the noose around the defenders. Martha saw the Blood Rider break from cover, trying to reach a better position. When a shot rang out, he spun and fell, crimson blooming across his shirt. "No!" The word tore from Martha's throat. She left Santos with his pistol and ran again, zigzagging through the gunfire. She slid to her knees beside the Blood Rider, her hands immediately going to the wound in his shoulder. "You damn fool woman," he ground out through clenched teeth. "Get to cover. Shut up and let me help you." Martha pressed hard on the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. His blood was hot on her hands. Too much of it, too fast. A shadow fell over them. Martha looked up to find Garrison himself standing there, gun pointed at her head. Well, the Coleman girl, playing nurse to a killer." His smile was cold. "Your father's debt remains unpaid. Miss Coleman, time to come with me." "I'll die first," Martha said, not moving from the Blood Rider's side. "That can be arranged." Garrison cocked his pistol. "Though it would be a waste. You're worth more alive." The Blood Rider's hand moved, almost too fast to see. The hideout gun he kept in his boot spoke once. Garrison staggered back, looking down in shock at the spreading red stain on his vest. "Should have stayed in Kansas City," the Blood Rider said weakly. Garrison fell to his knees, then toppled sideways. His death took the fight out of his men. Within minutes, they were retreating, leaderless and demoralized. The town's defenders harried them out onto the prairie, making sure they kept running. But Martha barely noticed the victory. The blood rider was fading, his skin going gray beneath his tan. She pressed harder on the wound, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly, his good hand coming up to touch her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Don't cry for me. I've lived longer than I had any right to." "You're not dying," Martha said fiercely. "I won't let you, stubborn woman." A ghost of his rare smile crossed his lips. "Should have known you'd be trouble from the moment I cut those ropes." Doc Winters appeared, the retired army surgeon moving with purpose despite his age. "Let me see, Lord Almighty, that's a lot of blood. Get him to my office now." Strong hands lifted the blood rider. Martha refused to let go of his hand as they carried him to the doctor's office. She was dimly aware of being covered in blood, his blood, but she didn't care. The next hours were the longest of Martha's life. Doc Winters worked with grim efficiency, extracting the bullet and stitching the wound. The blood rider drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering things that made no sense. Names of dead men, battles long past, apologies to ghosts only he could see. "The bullet nicked an artery," Doc Winters said, washing his hands in a basin. "I've done what I can, but he's lost a lot of blood. The next 24 hours will tell." Martha settled in beside the bed, determined to keep watch. Mrs. Hartley brought her clean clothes and food she couldn't eat. Sarah and Annie took turns sitting with her. Rosa brought candles and prayed quietly in the corner. As night fell, the blood rider's fever spiked. He thrashed in delirium, reliving old battles. Martha bathed his face with cool water, talking to him in low, soothing tones. "You saved me," she told him. "Now it's my turn to save you. So you fight, you hear me? You fight." Somewhere in the darkest part of the night, his fever broke. His eyes opened, focusing on her face with surprising clarity. "You're still here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Where else would I be?" He studied her for a long moment. "I'm not worth this devotion." "That's not for you to decide." Martha squeezed his hand. "Besides, you owe me a horse. Mine got shot in the battle. Can't let you die before you replace it." He actually laughed at that, though it turned into a cough. "Practical woman. Someone has to be." His thumb stroked across her knuckles, the touch feather-light. "Martha, if I don't make it, you will. But if I don't," his gray eyes held hers. "You're free now, really free. Don't let anyone take that from you again. Not for love, not for money, not for anything. Promise me." "Only if you promise to live," Martha countered. "I've gotten used to your surly presence. Town would be too quiet without you." "Surly?" He managed to look offended. "I prefer taciturn. Taciturn men don't usually drag home strays and start gunfights with slavers." "You're not a stray." His voice was fading as exhaustion pulled him under. "You're extraordinary." He slept then, but it was a healing sleep, not the restless thrashing of fever. Martha kept her vigil, dozing in the chair but never letting go of his hand. Dawn brought Doc Winters, who examined the wound and pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "He's tough as boot leather. This one might pull through after all." The blood rider woke again near noon, more lucid this time. He looked around the room, taking in the evidence of Martha's vigil, the basin of water, the pile of bloody rags, her exhausted face. "You look terrible," he said. "You're one to talk." But Martha smiled, relief making her giddy. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot." He tried to sit up, grimaced, and thought better of it. "Garrison? Dead. His men scattered. The town's safe." He absorbed this information quietly. "And you? You're not hurt?" "A few scratches. Nothing compared to—" She gestured at his bandaged shoulder. "You ran through gunfire. Twice." There was something in his voice she couldn't quite identify. Why? Martha considered the question. Why had she risked everything for this dangerous, damaged man? "Because you would have done the same for me," she said finally. "Because somewhere between being sold like livestock and finding freedom, you became important." His hand tightened on hers. "Martha, I know," she interrupted. "You're going to tell me you're no good for anyone, that you've got too much blood on your hands, that I deserve better. Save your breath. I've heard it all before, actually," he said slowly. "I was going to say thank you." That stopped her short. In all their conversations, she'd never heard him say those words. "For saving my life," he continued. "For staying, for," he seemed to struggle with the words, "for seeing something in me worth saving." Martha felt tears prick her eyes again. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently against his uninjured shoulder. "Always," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, two damaged souls finding comfort in each other. Outside, Fountain Creek was rebuilding, cleaning up the damage from the battle. But inside the doctor's office, something new was being built, fragile as spring ice, precious as water in the desert. The Blood Rider would recover. In a week, he'd be up and walking. In 2, he'd be back to his taciturn self, playing cards in the saloon and watching the horizon for trouble. But something fundamental had shifted between them in that dark night of blood and fever. Martha had found her strength, and he had found something he'd thought lost forever. Someone who looked at him and saw more than a killer. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be more challenges, more ghosts to face. But for now, it was enough. 6 months had passed since the battle with Garrison's men, and Fountain Creek had grown around the women who'd arrived as refugees. Sarah worked at the general store, her quick mind for figures making her invaluable. Annie had found her calling as Doc Winters' assistant, her steady hands perfect for medical work. Rosa had opened a small restaurant, her cooking drawing customers from miles around. Martha had surprised everyone, including herself, by becoming the town's unofficial mediator and advocate. Her education and way with words made her the person folks turned to when they needed letters written, contracts read, or disputes settled. She'd even started teaching some of the local children their letters. The Blood Rider had healed, though he carried his left arm differently now, favoring the shoulder that would always bear Garrison's mark. He'd stayed in Fountain Creek, another surprise, taking on the role of sheriff when the previous one decided to try his luck in California. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything changed again. Martha was in the makeshift schoolroom behind the church, teaching young Tom Hartley his numbers, when she heard horses approaching, many horses. Through the window, she saw them, a full cavalry unit, Union blue stark against the golden aspens. Her heart sank. After 6 months of peace, the outside world had found them again. The Blood Rider was already in the street when she got there, standing relaxed but ready, his sheriff's star catching the morning light. The cavalry captain, a stern-faced man with steel-gray whiskers, dismounted and approached. "Sheriff," the captain said, though his tone suggested he knew exactly who he was addressing. "I'm Captain Morrison, 3rd Cavalry. I'm looking for a man goes by Blood Rider, former soldier, wanted for desertion and various crimes during the war." "The war ended years ago, Captain," the Blood Rider replied evenly. "Most folks have moved on. The Army has a long memory." Morrison produced a warrant. "I have orders to bring him in for court-martial, dead or alive." The street had filled with townspeople. Martha saw Mrs. Hartley emerge from the hotel, the former spy mayor from his office, the schoolmarm from her house. They formed a loose circle. Not threatening, just present. "You going to come quietly?" Morrison asked. The Blood Rider's hand rested on his gun butt. "I left that life behind. Captain, I'm not going back." "Then you'll force me to—" "Captain Morrison." Martha stepped forward, using her most authoritative voice. "May I see that warrant?" Morrison frowned at her. "This is Army business, miss. Everything that happens in Fountain Creek is my business." Martha replied coolly, "I'm the town's legal advocate. Now, may I see the warrant?" Reluctantly, Morrison handed it over. Martha made a show of studying it carefully, though her mind was racing. She'd learned a lot about law in the past months, helping folks with their legal troubles. "This warrant," she said slowly, "is for desertion during wartime. But according to the Amnesty Proclamation of 1865, All Confederate soldiers were pardoned for wartime actions. He wasn't Confederate when he deserted, Morrison said. He was Union. Was he? Martha smiled. Because I have documents showing he was mustered into Confederate service in 1863, making him eligible for amnesty. It was a half-truth at best, but she delivered it with complete confidence. Morrison's frown deepened. What documents? Would you like to see them? Of course. We'd need to convene a proper hearing. Judge Whitman is due next month for the circuit court. You and your men are welcome to wait. She gestured around at the watching townspeople. I'm sure we can find accommodations for 20 soldiers for a month. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Keeping a unit in the field for a month over one deserter was expensive and impractical. The Blood Rider spoke up. Captain, I've done things I'm not proud of, but I've also tried to make amends. This town, these people, they've given me a second chance. I'm asking you to do the same. The law is the law, Morrison said, but with less conviction. The law also says a man can be tried by a jury of his peers. Martha interjected. Would you like to see how a Fountain Creek jury would rule? Morrison looked around at the assembled townspeople, former outlaws, refugees, people who'd found redemption in this mountain town. He was a soldier, but not a fool. My orders are specific, he said finally. Your orders are to find the Blood Rider, Martha said. But that man is dead. Has been for 6 months. This is Sheriff Coleman, duly elected lawman of Fountain Creek. Different man entirely. It was transparent fiction, but Morrison seemed to consider it. Martha pressed on. Captain, the war took enough from all of us. Does dragging one more man back to face charges from a conflict long over serve any purpose? Does it bring back the dead? Heal the wounded? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his sergeant. Would you say this man matches the description of the deserter we're looking for? The sergeant, an older man with knowing eyes, studied the Blood Rider carefully. Hard to say, sir. Been a lot of years. Man we're looking for would be younger. No gray in his hair, no scars like that fellow has. Could be him. Could be any of 100 men. Morrison nodded slowly. Fog of war. Sergeant, makes identification difficult. He turned back to Martha. Miss, I'll need a sworn statement that the man known as Blood Rider died 6 months ago. I'll have it ready within the hour, Martha promised. Morrison remounted his horse. We'll water the horses and move on. Seems our information was outdated. He touched his hat brim to Martha. Good day, miss. As the cavalry unit prepared to leave, Morrison paused beside the Blood Rider. That's a good woman you have there, Sheriff Coleman. See that you deserve her. Every day, the Blood Rider replied quietly. The town held its breath until the cavalry was out of sight, then erupted in celebration. People slapped the Blood Rider on the back, shook Martha's hand. She'd faced down the U-1 army with nothing but words and one, later, in the quiet of the sheriff's office. Martha found him standing at the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains red. Thank you, he said without turning. I told the truth, Martha said. The Blood Rider is dead. Has been since the day you chose to stay. He turned to her then, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Peace. Martha Coleman, he said slowly. You are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Flattery. Sheriff, that's new. Not flattery. Truth. He stepped closer. You could have had any life you wanted. Why stay here? Why fight for a broken-down soldier with too much blood on his hands? Martha considered the question. Why had she stayed? She could have moved on, started fresh somewhere else, but somewhere between that first night by the fire and today, Fountain Creek had become home, and he had become essential. Because, she said simply, this is where I belong, with these people, with you. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. His calloused hand cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. I've got nothing to offer you but a hard life in a small town. I'm not looking for an easy life, Martha replied. I'm looking for a real one. He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she might break. Martha had been kissed before, fumbling boys back in Coldwater Springs. But this was different. This was a promise, a claiming, a homecoming all at once. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me?" It wasn't a question. Martha laughed, surprising them both. "That's your proposal? No pretty words, no bended knee. I'm no good with pretty words, but I promise to protect you, provide for you, and never treat you as anything less than my equal. Is that enough?" Martha thought of all the pretty words her father had spoken while selling her like cattle. Pretty words meant nothing. But this man, this complicated, scarred, redeemed man, had shown her through actions what words couldn't convey. "It's enough," she whispered. They were married a week later, the whole town turning out for the celebration. Judge Whitman, arriving early for his circuit, performed the ceremony. Sarah stood as Martha's witness, tears streaming down her face. Jake was the blood rider's best man, grinning like a fool. "Do you, Martha Coleman, take this man?" Judge Whitman paused, looking questioningly at the groom. "Samuel Walker," the blood rider said quietly, speaking his true name for the first time in years. "My name is Samuel Walker." Martha squeezed his hand, understanding what it cost him to reclaim his identity. "Do you, Martha Coleman, take Samuel Walker to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The celebration lasted well into the night. Rosa's restaurant provided the feast, the saloon provided the drinks, and the whole town provided the joy. Even the taciturn former outlaws seemed touched by the sight of two people who'd found love despite everything. As the evening wound down, Samuel, she'd have to get used to calling him that, drew her aside. "I have something for you." He produced a folded paper from his pocket, a wedding gift. Martha unfolded it, her eyes widening. It was a deed to 20 acres just outside town, with a small cabin already built. "It's not much," he said, suddenly uncertain. "But it's ours, free and clear. It's perfect." Martha threw her arms around him, not caring who saw. "It's home." That night, in their own cabin with the mountains standing guard and the stars bearing witness, Martha Coleman Walker understood what freedom truly meant. It wasn't just the absence of chains or contracts. It was the power to choose your own path, to build your own life, to love without fear. She'd been sold like livestock, wept in despair, and found salvation in the rough, gentle grip of a man everyone feared. But that was just the beginning of her story. The real story of building a life, a family, a future in this frontier town was just beginning. 5 years had passed like seasons changing in the mountains. The cabin Samuel had given Martha as a wedding gift had grown into a proper homestead, with a barn, corrals, and pastures where horses grazed in the shadow of the peaks. Martha stood on the porch this spring morning, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold while her coffee steamed in the crisp air. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Samuel was returning from his dawn patrol, sitting easy in the saddle despite the silver that now threaded liberally through his dark hair. Beside him rode a younger man, their deputy, Tom Hartley, the same boy Martha had once taught his numbers. "Any trouble?" Martha called. "Quiet as a church," Samuel replied, dismounting with the same fluid grace he'd always possessed. The old shoulder wound might slow him on cold mornings, but it hadn't diminished his presence. He kissed her cheek, his lips warm against her cool skin. 5 years of marriage hadn't dimmed the spark between them. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by shared struggles and quiet victories. "Sarah's coming by later," Martha said. "She wants to discuss the new school building." Sarah had married the bank manager 2 years prior, a good man who appreciated her sharp mind. Together, they'd helped establish Fountain Creek's first real school, where Martha now taught 23 students ranging from age 6 to 16. "And Rosa's bringing lunch," Martha added. "She says she has news." Samuel smiled. "Let me guess, another baby on the way?" Rosa had married one of Samuel's former men, Luis, and they already had 3 children who ran wild through the town's streets. Annie, not to be outdone, had married Doc Winters's nephew and had twins who were the terror of the Sunday school. The morning progressed as so many did now, peaceful, productive, purposeful. Martha tended her garden while Samuel repaired a section of fence. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that comes from knowing someone so well that words become optional. It was near noon when they saw the rider approaching. Martha shaded her eyes, then smiled. "It's Jake." Jake had taken over as sheriff when Samuel stepped down 2 years ago, claiming he was getting too old for the job. In truth, Martha suspected he simply preferred the quieter life of a rancher, though he still served as deputy when needed. "Got a visitor in town asking for you," Jake said without preamble. "Says he's your father." Martha's blood turned to ice. Beside her, Samuel went very still, his hand instinctively moving to his hip where his gun no longer rested. "My father's dead," Martha said flatly. "Well, this fellow claims otherwise. Old man, drunk as a skunk, saying his daughter Martha owes him for all the trouble she's caused." Martha felt Samuel's hand on her shoulder, warm and steadying. "We'll come," he said quietly. The ride to town was silent. Martha's mind churned with memories she'd tried to bury, the smell of whiskey on her father's breath, the shame in his eyes as he'd signed her away, the rope around her wrists. They found him in the saloon, exactly where she'd expected. Samuel Coleman Sr. looked like a scarecrow someone had forgotten to take down after harvest. Thin, ragged, hollow. The years hadn't been kind. He looked up when they entered, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. When they landed on Martha, something like recognition flickered. "There she is," he slurred. "My ungrateful daughter, left me with nothing while she lives high and mighty." The saloon had gone quiet. Everyone knew Martha's story, how she'd come to Fountain Creek. They watched with hard eyes as the old man struggled to his feet. "You owe me," he continued, pointing a shaking finger. "I raised you, fed you, kept a roof over your head, and you repay me by running off with some killer. You sold me," Martha said quietly, "like livestock, to pay your gambling debts. It was legal, binding contract." He fumbled in his coat, producing a familiar paper. "See, still valid. You owe me $800, plus interest." Samuel moved, but Martha caught his arm. This was her battle. She walked forward, each step measured. The frightened girl who'd wept in that wagon was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd faced down the U.S. Army, who'd built a life from nothing, who'd learned her own worth. "That contract," she said clearly, "was signed under duress. It's worthless." "The hell it is. I'll take it to a judge." "Go ahead." Martha's voice cut through his bluster. "Take it to Judge Whitman. Explain how you sold your daughter to men who intended to force her into servitude. See how that goes." Her father's face flushed. "You always were too proud. Thought you were better than me, better than Coldwater Springs." "I thought you loved me," Martha said, and was surprised to find the words hurt less than she'd expected. "I thought a father was supposed to protect his daughter, not sell her to the highest bidder. I did what I had to do." "No." Martha shook her head. "You did what was easy. What would get you another bottle, another hand of cards. You chose whiskey over your own flesh and blood." The old man seemed to shrink. I had debts. They would have killed me, so you let them take me instead." Silence stretched between them. Martha became aware of the watching crowd, her neighbors, her friends, her chosen family. Sarah stood near the door, ready to support her. Rosa clutched Luisa's arm. Even the schoolmarm had come, her usually stern face soft with sympathy. "I've built a good life here," Martha said finally. "I have a husband who respects me, work that matters, friends who value me. I have everything I never had in Coldwater Springs. I'm your father," he whispered. "No, you are my father. You gave up that right when you signed that paper." Martha reached into her pocket, pulling out a small leather purse. "But I won't leave you with nothing, the way you left me." She placed the purse on the bar. "There's enough there for a room, a meal, and passage back to Coldwater Springs, or wherever you want to go." But not here. This is my home, and you're not welcome in it. Samuel Coleman Sr. looked at the purse, then at his daughter. For a moment, she thought she saw the man he might have been, before the whiskey, before the debts, before the choices that had led them here. Martha, Goodbye, Father. She turned and walked out. Samuel Walker falling into step beside her. They didn't speak until they were halfway home, the town falling away behind them. You all right? Samuel asked. Martha considered the question. Yes, I think I am. She looked at him. I thought seeing him would bring back all the pain, all the anger, but mostly I just felt sorry for him. He's still trapped in his old life, while I've moved on. You gave him money. Not for him, for me, so I could close that chapter completely, with no debts on either side. Samuel smiled, that rare, transformative expression that still made her heart skip. Have I told you today that you're remarkable? Not since breakfast. They rode on in comfortable silence until their homestead came into view. But it wasn't empty. Horses filled the yard, and Martha could see people on the porch. What? Did you really think we'd let you face him alone? Sarah called as they dismounted. We saw Jake ride out and figured something was wrong. The porch was crowded with friends. Rosa had brought food. Of course, Annie had closed the clinic to be there. Mrs. Hartley sat in the rocking chair like a benevolent general. Even some of Samuel's old gang had shown up, standing awkwardly but determinedly supportive. You didn't have to, Martha began, then stopped, tears threatening. Thank you, all of you. That's what family does. Mrs. Hartley said firmly. The real kind, not the blood kind. They spent the afternoon together, sharing food and stories, laughter gradually replacing the morning's tension. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, people drifted away, back to their own lives and responsibilities. Martha and Samuel sat on their porch as they did most evenings, watching the light change on the peaks. The morning's events felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. Do you ever think about what would have happened? Martha asked. If you hadn't been there that day, if Garrison had taken me east. Don't, Samuel said firmly. That way lies madness. What matters is what did happen. We found each other. We built this. He gestured to their home, their land, their life. Martha leaned against his shoulder. Samuel, I have something to tell you. Something in her tone made him turn to look at her fully. What is it? Annie confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait for the right moment. She took his scarred hand and placed it on her still flat belly. We're going to have a baby. The expression on his face, wonder, joy, fear, love, all mixed together, was worth every hard mile that had brought them here. A baby. He breathed. Martha, are you sure? Very sure. Due in the fall. Annie thinks. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass. A baby. He repeated. Our baby. Our baby. Martha confirmed. Growing up free, in a place where people are judged by who they choose to be, not where they came from. They sat together as the stars emerged, no longer two damaged souls seeking redemption, but a family looking toward the future. The shadows of the past would always be there, in Samuel's scars, in Martha's memories, in the choices that had shaped them. But shadows only existed where light shone. And here, in this place they'd claimed through blood and tears and stubborn hope. The light was winning. Martha thought of the girl she'd been, sold like livestock and weeping in despair. That girl could never have imagined this moment, safe in the arms of a man who cherished her, carrying new life, surrounded by chosen family, truly free. The mountains stood eternal guard as night fell over Fountain Creek, and on a porch built by scarred hands and determination. Samuel and Martha Walker sat together, writing the next chapter of a story that had begun in chains but would end in freedom. Sometimes the broken places were where the light got in, and sometimes, just sometimes, two broken people could build something whole and beautiful from the pieces. In the distance, a wolf howled. wild and free as the wind. Martha smiled and placed her hand over Samuel's where it rested on her belly. They were home. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Martha and Samuel's journey from despair to hope, I'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's during your commute, at home, or perhaps even somewhere out in the wide frontier. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, redemption, and second chances in the American frontier. And share your thoughts about this story in the comments below. Until next time, partners.